Ready, so let's work on week 6.1. Let's implement a table render module because that's where we're at when we look at our app. So after doing attendance, we've learned about this new section that we've added with the HTML and the CSS. So now we're going to actually take our local storage, create in-memory carbon footprint on page load, and now we can start rendering all the entries, right? So every time we submit, right now we get the current one, but we don't get any of the previous ones. So like in my example, I have three objects in my array. Okay, so I've done a little setup so you can catch up with me. I've done the import. I've created the table renderer, because it's rendering and it is the renderer. So it's rendering the table. I've created the file. I've put in some notes here in the file that this will render the carbon footprint entries, and then we're only going to do the data that we have because we know we have other data coming. The date, the size, household size, house size, diet, food, and total. Okay. I do need to add, let me add here, we do need to add inside our app.js, and I should have put 6.1 so you can here as well. We'll put that we are going to modify, so here on 6.1 we're going to modify the handle submit to trigger the table update after, oh actually we've already update after an entry, table update, that's right. I was thinking it was the last one. No, this one is correct. And then we won't get to it this time, but we will end up also doing this on the init function. We will do some and also render there, but we're not going to get there yet. Okay. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to have you do here is go ahead and we'll change, right? So we're going to change to where we automatically display our table heading. So I will go ahead and open my index file. I'll scroll down to the bottom. So I know based on attendance how this table is coded. We have the headings, right? And then in the body here is where we're going to end up working. But for now, instead of displaying none and having to go in every time and change it in DevTools, oh, sorry, we'll just have it do table. I had a moment there. Okay, so now we know we have our headings displayed, and if we wanted to, we might as well come down here, and for now we'll put none here. Now we're going to end up in our code handling these two things, but for now, just to make our life a little bit easier, we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so you already have these two in here, so now what we want to do is start with in our module is to get some references into the table, into the body, and into the no entries message. Okay, so this is not anything new, but always good to, okay, it's equal to document get element by ID. And so in this case, if we're not sure, we can always go over here, hit inspect, or go to element, hit inspect, right, and come down here and see that our table itself, here's our ID. Okay, so again, if you're ever not sure, go back there and check. Okay, so then we're also going to need, in this case, did I give us the body? No. So in this case, we're also going to need the body itself, right? So right here. So we know we have the body itself, and the body is going to be, like we've seen before, not the ID, but a query selector. So footprint table body equal to footprint table dot query selector, and in this case we're going to select body, T-body, because that's the tag we're going after. Okay, all right, so the other thing we're going to want is that message. So no entries message Okay, it's going to be equal to, and in this case we are going to go after the ID since it's not inside of there, I believe. Okay, so what we're talking about is the one that we put, yeah, so this is not, it's outside of the table. So here's our ID for that one. Okay, good. So now we have our 3 references, and I believe I had, yeah, go ahead and do that. Okay, so go ahead and put that comment in there. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to code our main function that we're going to have that's going to coordinate everything else, right? So this is our main function. Let's go ahead and give ourselves a little space. So this is going to handle the table renderer into the entries, but there's going to be several things that it's going to coordinate, basically calling what we call helper functions. And basically helper function is, instead of writing all the code in the main function, we're going to write functions. We've kind of done some of this already. We haven't termed them helper functions, but they really are, if they're really only doing 1 or 2 things for us. So in this case, let's actually go and we're going to export it. Okay, we're going to export const render table equal to a function. Okay, that function is going to take in something that we'll see in a minute. We are going to export it because we're going to need it later. Okay, so we'll then grab, here it is. We're going to loop through. Oh, actually, I should have put this above. Yeah. So in this case, it is going to take in, okay, the parameter. Okay, so what does this need? Well, we think about what we're passing it, and this is again is the idea that what we've seen several times, and we could do this either way. So maybe it helps if you see it this way, to where now that we have that set up, we come over here because it's in the app.js that we're actually going to place the corresponding thing that we're calling, right? So table renderer, right? Dot table render. Oh, render table. Render table. Okay. And then what are we going to pass it? We're going to pass it carbon footprint entries. Okay. So let me make sure I have that correct. Yeah, I do. Okay. And here, sometimes you know what I like to do, right? Console.log inside render table. Okay. So now we're passing it carbon footprint entries, but in here we're actually just going to call it entries, just because that's what it is, and also it's shorter. It's kind of nice to have something a little shorter that we're doing. Now think about this. In that we're passing it all the entries, so what are we going to want to do? We're going to want to look at each one, right? So each one of those entries is an object, and that object is going to be rendered as a table, in this case a row, a TD. Okay, sorry, the TR is a row, TD is the cells. Okay, so we're going to render that row, and then within that row we'll render those cells. Okay, so just think about why we're passing this. Okay, and then in this case, let's actually in here maybe change this instead of in here. Let's actually change this to a template string. Okay, and let's go ahead and say entry. Oh, actually no, not yet. Actually, leave that alone. I was jumping ahead a little bit. So when you think about what we're going to do in here is we're going to loop. That's where I was going. So we're going to say for, okay, const, and this is where we give it, what are we going to, how are we going to refer to each of those objects inside that array, right? You might call it object, but in this case, because we're passing it and calling it entries, each one of them is an entry. But remember, I call this whatever I want because it's a variable, okay, of entries. Okay, good, right? So now, now we can do what I was trying to do before, right? which is not necessary, is not a bad thing, is let's look at those entry. Okay, because again, the more you get used to seeing this, the idea of loops, because we've done now, I think maybe 3 or 4 of these loops. We've always used the for loop. We haven't used a for each loop. We haven't used another kind of loop, mostly because these are just simpler. But knowing how to code different loops is a good idea. But let's see this in action now. Okay, so let's come over to our code. Let's come down to here. Right, and so now once we hit a submission, so we're inside of here, okay, we know we have 4 objects inside of there. So if we hit, so remember object, object. Now why are we getting object, object? If you roll over, that's because when we see object, object, it just can't, we're not being specific enough for it to render the pieces that we want to see, meaning the key value pairs, right? This is that whole object that we have access to. So in this case, it's going to show up 4 times. Okay, so that's really what I wanted you to understand about this one is, like, you know, we're iterating over. So for each one, show me the object. Remember, this syntax is not the object syntax. This syntax is just injecting with the template string. And I think I have some content about that. Oh, I guess I didn't. Okay, so now let's think about what we're going to do, because here's where inside of here, right, inside of each one of these, then we could go ahead and code what we need here, but this is where we want to call one of our, you know, that we're going to write these helper functions to do this. Okay, so let's come up here. We're going to say const. Now this is a function that is only going to be available inside of this. We're going to say create table row. Okay, row. Okay, it's going to be equal to a function. We're going to pass entry to it. Okay. So every time, so this will be called for each one of the objects. All right, so we're going to set up a variable inside of this block scope called row. Okay, is going to be equal to, and here's some JavaScript we have not written. So we're going to say document dot create element. Now we're going to create an element, and again refer back to what we did in attendance, a row. So that whole row is we create that here. Now be clear. Or understand that when we create that element here, we're actually not creating it on the document yet. It's just kind of hanging out there. It's not inside of here. And that's an important thing, because what we're going to do is build up that entire TR-TD combination that we need. So one of the things we're going to do, and you'll see this being used as we move forward, is called dataset.id. And I'm going to show you what how this is used as we get into coding our actions for our table, our update and our deletes in there. So in this case, we're going to call it entry dot ID. And if you remember from last week, we set up a unique ID for each object, and this unique ID allows us to set a data value on the entire row and on the buttons themselves when we get there, to allow us to uniquely identify that which we need to do to write code that does some type of JavaScript functionality when selected. Now we're going to also specify the row, but we're going to say inner HTML. So inner HTML is basically saying, look in this TR, okay, that we have. This is the HTML that I want you to include. And we'll do template string here, okay, and it's going to be a rather large template string, okay. So let's say TD, okay. And now what I want you to do is we're going to do something to make our lives a little bit easier. So I'm going to come down here, I'm going to copy this, okay, and now I'm going to end the TD. So basically what we're doing is we're creating a template string, and I think that's the content I was looking for in the documentation earlier. In this template string, we're going to inject each of the key, and in this case the values based on the key that we want to see. Okay, so it's going to be dot whatever it is we want. So what do we want? And we can already see it based on the way the table's laid out. We're going to need the date first. Okay, so what do we know? Where is the date stored? Well, if we've forgotten, we can come up here, we can look at an object, okay, and we can say, okay, timestamp, that's what I'm looking for. Okay, now what I'm going to do, because I just don't want to have to type so much, is I'm actually going to duplicate this, because I know for each time I do this, I'm going to do timestamp. Okay, now you're going to see, and we'll do a couple of these and then we'll come back. And the reason we'll do that is there's going to be more work that we're going to need to do here. And I'm going to do another one. So every time before I start doing it, so now what do I need? I need household size. So if I want to remember, is household members. Okay, and this just makes my typing life a lot. Let me grab this and pull it over just so we can actually see this. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to need that one. Okay, so I'm going to also need, now what am I going to need? I'm going to need house size itself. So I like house square footage. Okay, now this one also we're going to have to do, because remember that was an apartment in there as well. So we'll have to do some more work for these. But for this first one, we're just going to output. So now we're going to do diet type, which was here. Okay, so now, before I do this one, I'm going to make my life easier so I don't have to type so much. So by the way, 1, 2, 3, 4, we haven't done this one, 5. So in other words, these are the number of cells, the TDs, that we're going to need inside this TR. Okay, so you just think every time we create one of these, we're creating a new cell, but in HTML it's called a TD. Okay, so now what's the next one? Will be food packaging. So food packaging here. Good. Remember, we're specifying the keys, and that what we'll output in here is the values. Okay, so let's, and I forgot, so let's do that again. All right. Good. And just you can already see where doing a little bit of productivity can help you here, meaning those keystrokes can make your life easier. So the last one we will have is the print itself, the total. Okay, now let's go look, because over here that gives us all the ones we need up until the action. So what is the action? And we learned about this in attendance, so now we're actually going to code it. Right, so in this case we're also going to need, I'm actually going to code this one, okay, because in here we're going to give it the class. So class, and we learned about the action cell. Okay, so on the TD itself. Cool. Right, and so in here, and I'm just going to indent this over for readability, we're going to create a button. Okay, and then we could go ahead and again make our lives a little easier. And this is where, because we're writing HTML in a JavaScript file, we don't necessarily get some of those nice tools, but we can still do this. Okay, so what in here we're going to need is there's a class. Remember, this was an action class. Oh, I could have actually done it after I did this part, but oh well. Button. And then this has two classes. So this gives it the color itself, which is nice. Okay. And then we're going to give it inside of here, in addition to now that our classes, we're also going to give this that ID. That data ID is going to be equal to, okay, that entry, right? So this entry ID. So I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to inject it because this is all a template string. Cool. And I believe it's interesting. Yeah, so actually this is wrapped on the outside by quotes because that's the HTML part of this. And then we're going to do edit here. So I think what I'm going to do is make my life a little easier. and just duplicate that one and then hit edit here. Okay, or delete. Okay, so on the delete, remember we have two classes here. We have the ID, the same ID is what we want on both, but in this one it's going to be delete. Okay, cool. So now what we could do is look at, and let's go ahead and wrap our, end our TD here, okay, our TR. So now let's actually look at what this is creating, because like I said, what I want you to understand on this guy is that what we're doing is we're building up a template string, right? So we're creating the TR, we're building up inside the TR because the TR is represented by the row, we're giving it an ID, and then we're injecting all this, or writing HTML with inside JavaScript with template strings. Okay, so let's do this. Let's come down here, and now, oh yeah, so let's actually complete this part, because what we're going to do here is we're actually going to end up calling the function itself. So let's say constant inside of here, we're going to say row element. Okay, is going to be equal to calling that create table row, passing the entry. Okay, so what do we know? If we're calling a function, right? And again, we're iterating over. So for every object that it finds, it's going to call this create table, and it's going to create this string. So what we know is after we create this, we're going to need to return something. And how do we know we're going to need to return something? Because the result of this running then is stored in this element. Okay, or sorry, this variable. So we're going to return the row. Right, so we build it up and then we return it. So we needed that in actually to see the whole thing. So let's do this. Let's go ahead. Now we already have some items in there. So in here now, we have an entry. Our first one, matter of fact, let's make this to where we have a little more. We can see a little better. We're going to end up seeing it down here in a minute. Hit step. Okay, so we're passing in our first object. We're creating our TR. Remember, this is just creating it in memory. It's not creating it on the web page yet, because until we do something else, it doesn't do that. So now we can see, and by the way, right now that we've ran the line 11, which is the create the TR, take the TR and put data set on it. You can come down here and you can do TR tab, row. Okay, so this will show you right now, and this is what's great to understand, is whenever we're doing this, you can look inside the TR, the entire row. You can see that unique ID, and we could go peer inside the object to see it, but here's where that got set. And now this won't go line by line. This will just bam, create the entire string. But if we do that thing again down on the console, now we can see each of those TDs, okay, and we can see it populated the data, and we can see the buttons themselves. Okay, so again, knowing how to look in to see what we're creating, even though we don't see it on the page yet, is really helpful for troubleshooting, because maybe, right, and this is like, okay, is there something that didn't come through? And you know, we can see our classes got in, our IDs got in, and we can see our text itself. So now that we've done that, we're going to return it, okay, and now we see all of that was stored. Now we're actually back already doing the next one. Okay, so it's going to go through and do it again and again and again. And I'm just going to let it run now. Okay. Oh, actually, let's stop it here and let it run, because there's really nothing except what we just saw. And it really is helpful, honestly, to go through and look at each one of them as they create, because unless you've done this kind of thing before, it takes a moment to kind of understand what this code is doing. And I hope that we've covered it enough to give you a better idea. So now, the last thing we need to do is we'd actually need to say, now that I have that locally scoped inside of here variable that exists from the return value of this helper function called create table row. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call footprint table body. And this is something we haven't seen before, but basically it's saying, hey, reference this DOM, our HTML, our DOM, right, our rendered DOM, and append. Basically update is what append child is doing. So place this in, reference this and update it with what I'm about to give you. So in this case it'd be row element, right, the what came back from here. And so now we get to benefit from all this work. So now we can actually see if we don't have any of these. So if I calculate now, what I can see is these items now got populated. Now, as soon as you see them, right, you can see our classes, how they're rendering our buttons. We can see, date came in a little funky. This a little different, right? So what now we're going to do on the next one is we're actually going to write even a few more helper functions to format these things the way we want. But let's make sure I got all this. Loop through. Oh yeah, that's what I was actually looking for. So loop through. I think I did this one though. Yep, I did. And then using the for each here. Okay, using the for each and then calling the helper function. Okay, so calling the helper function here, this create table is our helper function, right, to build the row. Render, okay, we already did that. We updated that, okay. Good. So in this case, did I already put this on? Oh, we didn't. Okay, good. So we need to add some content to our creates and returns a single row of the entry. Good, and the function encapsulates, and this is good, the logic of building each HTML row. Okay, the row, each row's HTML, right? It's taking in an object. We reference that as a locally scoped variable called entry. Okay, where it's returning a created DOM element. So I hope you really do go read this and see if this content that we're providing helps you extend your knowledge about these things. And this is going to be super useful, right? This idea that I was talking about before. Now we're not going to see it in this one this week, but we will see this soon, the benefit of using this adding, and I would tell you, let's go ahead and do that again. Coming down here, if I hit inspect, and this is really helpful to see, is that I can see that entire row has that unique ID, but also look at this, also the buttons themselves, because we need to be a way to uniquely identify them. So it can be very helpful to us later, that concept. Okay, and this is what we were just talking about. This is store that you directly on the row. Yeah, we'll put this here. Because add to the comment that we already have, and the inner that's what I was looking for, the inner HTML, the row using the template string. Okay, so using the .inner HTML, the method, creating the TR, setting its data set, its inner HTML, because right now while we've created it, we do have a dataset ID on it, but now we're creating the TDs, the individual cells, and then we return each cell, and we're creating, and then we're appending the body. Boom, 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 every time. Okay, every time. So for every entry, however many there are, these two functions, first the run will run, return this, and then this will reference the DOM and append each row element that comes back. Okay, let's see. You have a couple of things to research. How does JS use the dataset attribute? We talked about that when creating HTML elements. How with JS, how does create element differ from inner HTML? Because we're doing something similar with both, But just to give you the high overview that we've already kind of covered, this is building it with a template string, and this is creating the element itself. Just to, so it's just a different way to do it, and there are times that you'll use create element and there's times you'll use enter HTML, because imagine if you didn't use enter HTML, you'd have to say create element TD and then modify that return TD. So this in some ways just makes it a little bit easier to reason about, but do some more research. How does append child work, and what are the other methods? This is good to update the DOM, right? So these are really important things that you're going to see in the checkpoint. So for this one, let's go ahead and do your get workflow and move on to the next.